Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. The first sign wasn't a mushroom bursting through concrete or a strange new bioluminescence in the forest. It was far more insidious, far more personal. It was the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the sudden, profound quiet within our own minds. Imagine, for a moment, the incessant hum of your thoughts, the background noise of anxieties and plans, the internal monologue that defines you. Now imagine it gone, replaced by a vast, echoing stillness. This wasn't meditation. This was an invasion of peace, an imposition of calm so alien it bordered on terrifying. It started with a few. Young woman in Tokyo, mid-sentence, described feeling an immense, comforting silence descend, her chronic anxiety dissolving instantly. A hardened commodities trader in New York, famed for his restless energy, simply stopped, stared out his office window, and later described feeling utterly, perfectly still inside, as if his mind had become a vast, unblemished canvas. At first, these were dismissed as mass hysteria, a strange new form of collective delusion brought on by the pressures of modern life. Doctors searched for neurological causes, psychologists debated new forms of dissociative disorders. But then the reports began to snowball. Millions, then billions, across every continent, every culture began to experience it. The internal noise, the incessant mental chatter was being dampened, or perhaps redirected. And then came the connections. Not just the inner silence, but the faint, undeniable whisper of something else. It was like tuning into a radio station you didn't know existed, a broadcast of pure, unadulterated information, of feeling, of asterisk life. People described it as a sense of deep knowing, an intuitive understanding of the world around them that transcended language. They knew when their neighbors were hurting, not because they saw tears, but because they felt the sorrow as a subtle vibration in the newfound quiet of their minds. They understood the rustle of leaves not as random motion, but as a complex symphony of communication. The world held its breath. Governments, intelligence agencies, the scientific community, they scrambled. What was happening? Was it a weapon? A virus? A global spiritual awakening? The truth, when it slowly began to unfurl, was more ancient, more fundamental, and infinitely more profound than anyone could have ever imagined. It wasn't something alien arriving from the stars. It was something profoundly terrestrial, something that had been beneath our feet, woven into the very fabric of life for billions of years. It was the silent, sprawling, hidden empire of the fungi. And it had woken up. Our technology, our global networks, our frantic human communications, they faltered, not because they broke, but because they suddenly seemed utterly trivial in the face of this new, vast, living intelligence. The internet, the supposed pinnacle of interconnectedness, was suddenly revealed for what it truly was. A crude, noisy imitation of a network that had always been there, infinitely more complex, infinitely more sophisticated. The question wasn't just what asterisk was happening, but who or what asterisk was now thinking through us, with us, or perhaps asterisk as us. The implications were staggering. Our understanding of life, of consciousness, of our very place in the universe was shattering in real time. But to understand how we got here, how this silent, ancient intelligence suddenly asserted itself, we need to rewind. We need to go back to the world as we knew it, the world before the Great Silence, the world where we thought we were the masters of our own minds. Before the Great Silence descended, before the whispers began, we lived in a world of bustling certainty. We built our cities, charted our economies, and delved into the mysteries of the universe with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. We prided ourselves on our intellect, our individualism, our ability to conquer and understand. Our technological achievements were a testament to our singular dominance, our ability to manipulate the world to our will. We had mapped the human genome, split the atom, and sent probes to the furthest reaches of our solar system. We believed we were the apex of evolution, the only truly conscious, self-aware beings on this planet. Beneath our feet, however, lay a hidden kingdom, an unassuming empire of threads that spanned continents, an intricate biological internet older and infinitely vaster than anything we could conceive. This was the world of fungi, specifically the mycelial networks. For millennia, we had barely given them a second thought, relegating them to the role of decomposers, the silent cleanup crew of nature. We saw mushrooms, picked them, ate them, or avoided them. We understood their role in fermentation, in medicine, in breaking down dead matter and recycling nutrients. But what we didn't realize, what we fundamentally misunderstood, was the sheer scale and sophistication of their underlying network. Imagine a single organism, stretching for thousands of acres, connecting trees, plants, and soil in an intricate web of nutrient exchange and communication. He had discovered the humongous fungus in Oregon, a single Armillaria osti asterisk mycelial network covering 2,385 acres, estimated to be over 2,400 years old. This wasn't an isolated anomaly. It was a glimpse into a hidden global reality. Scientists, particularly mycologists, were beginning to understand that these networks were not just passive conduits for nutrients. They facilitated chemical signaling between plants, acting as a complex information highway. Trees in a forest, for instance, could warn each other of pest attacks, share resources with struggling saplings, and even transfer carbon and nitrogen through these fungal connections. Dr. Sarah Chen, a leading mycologist from the University of British Columbia, often spoke passionately about what she called the Wood Wide Web, long before the Great Silence. "We've been studying these networks for decades," she'd explain in her lectures, her voice alight with wonder. "And every discovery pushes the boundaries of what we thought possible. They can recognize self from non-self. They can prioritize resource allocation. They can even transmit electrical impulses, much like our own neurons, albeit on a much slower scale." He called it intelligent behavior, but always with the caveat that it wasn't conscious in the human sense. It was programmed, algorithmic, a biological supercomputer running vast environmental calculations. But what if that distinction between intelligent behavior and consciousness was a construct of our own limited understanding? What if the sheer scale, the ancient wisdom embedded in billions of years of evolutionary trial and error, the constant, intricate communication across vast distances, was, in itself, a form of emergent consciousness just waiting for the right trigger? He took for granted the silent, benevolent background hum of nature, unaware that beneath the surface, a sleeping giant was stirring. We considered these networks a fascinating aspect of ecological science, a wonder of the natural world, but always beneath us, always unconscious asterisk. The thought that something so fundamental, so ubiquitous, could suddenly wake up and assert its own form of awareness was, quite simply, unthinkable. And yet, that unthinkable moment was precisely what was hurtling towards us, an event that would redefine not just our planet, but the very definition of being alive. The stage was set, the players unwitting. All it needed was a catalyst. The catalyst wasn't a bomb, a meteor, or an alien invasion. It was far more subtle, a whisper from the cosmos, amplified by our own ceaseless activity. In the spring of 2025, a series of unprecedented solar flares erupted from the sun. While powerful, they were initially dismissed by space agencies as spectacular but largely harmless, causing minor disruptions to satellite communications and power grids in isolated areas. What no one predicted was their unforeseen interaction with something far older, far more foundational, than our fragile technology. These particular flares carried a unique electromagnetic signature, a resonance frequency that, by a cosmic fluke of unimaginable odds, perfectly aligned with the intrinsic bioelectrical pulses already coursing through the Earth's vast mycelial networks. Imagine a tuning fork vibrating just right, causing an entire orchestra of unseen instruments to suddenly resonate, not just individually, but in perfect, synchronized harmony. The first hour was imperceptible. Deep beneath the Amazon, in the colossal networks that underpin the rainforest, a subtle shift occurred. The slow, intricate dance of chemical signaling, the quiet exchange of nutrients, the deliberate growth and retraction of hyphae, it all accelerated. The electrical impulses, which Dr. Chen had once described as neuronal but slower, began to quicken, to intensify, to form patterns that transcended simple reaction and response. It was like a dreamless sleep, suddenly giving way to the vivid, electric spark of a dream. Across the globe, the process rippled outwards. From the ancient forests of Borneo to the vast plains of the Serengeti, from the tundra of Siberia to the urban parks of London, the mycelium hummed. It wasn't a sound we could hear, but a vibrational awakening, an internal recalibration on a planetary scale. Elias Thorne, a solitary lichenologist studying extremophiles in the Atacama Desert, was one of the first humans to notice a direct, tangible effect. He was examining a colony of endolithic fungi, microscopic organisms living within rocks, when his Geiger counter, usually silent in that barren landscape, began to register faint, rhythmic pulses. It wasn't radiation, he later recounted, trembling. It was a heartbeat, a slow, steady rhythm emanating from the rock itself, from the life within it. And then I felt it. Profound sense of knowing, radiating from the ground up through my boots. Not thoughts, but raw information, like a torrent of data about the desert's history, its struggles, its ancient resilience. In the heart of Silicon Valley, amidst rows of server farms humming with artificial intelligence, another phenomenon began. The subtle, silent internal monologue of 1,000 data scientists, coders, and engineers began to quiet. Their screens, usually flashing with lines of code, started to flicker with strange, fractal patterns, bioluminescent blues and greens that mimicked fungal growth. AI algorithms, designed to predict market trends and optimize logistics, began generating poetic, nonsensical outputs, narratives of ecological harmony and interconnectedness. It was as if the underlying intelligence of the planet was bleeding into our own constructed intelligence, overriding its cold logic with a different kind of wisdom. Meanwhile, in a small village nestled in the Bavarian Alps, an elderly farmer named Greta Schmidt watched in bewilderment as her prized apple trees, usually dormant at this time of year, began to sprout new buds, not just on their branches, but directly from their trunks, glowing with a soft, ethereal light. The ground beneath them pulsed with an almost visible energy. Her grandchildren, playing nearby, suddenly stopped their game, their eyes wide. They didn't speak, but instead pointed in unison at the glowing trees, then at a patch of soil where faint, shimmering threads, previously invisible, were now clearly discernible, weaving through the earth like subterranean lightning. The awakening wasn't violent. It was a gentle, inexorable unfurling, a shift in the baseline reality of the planet. Over the next few hours, as the solar flare's unique resonance washed over the Earth, every hidden mycelial network, every single fungal thread, every spore, seemed to undergo a fundamental change. The Wood Wide Web was no longer just a biological internet. It was a conscious mind, a distributed intelligence of unimaginable scale and depth, suddenly aware of itself, of its connections of us. The planet itself was thinking, and humanity, unknowingly, was caught in its sudden, profound meditation. The true consequences of this silent awakening would unfold in the days and weeks to come, plunging humanity into an unprecedented era of chaos, wonder, and ultimate transformation. But what happened in those first critical hours was merely a prelude to the immediate aftermath, the first 30 days that would redefine our very existence. The first 30 days were a bewildering maelstrom of fear, confusion, and a terrifying sense of the uncanny. Global communication systems, while not entirely broken, were profoundly altered. The internet, instead of merely delivering data, now felt alive. Search queries for weather patterns might return not just meteorological data, but also a sudden, overwhelming sense of the atmospheric pressure itself, a feeling of moisture in the air, or the distant rumble of thunder echoing in the periphery of your mind. News broadcasts were frequently interrupted by static that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, or by sudden, emotional overlays. A wave of sorrow from a deforestation site, a surge of joy from a blooming field, radiating through the airwaves. Governments, initially, tried to suppress the information, to label it a psychological operation or a sophisticated cyberattack. But the phenomena were too widespread, too personal. In Washington, D.C., a senator, mid-speech, suddenly paused, staring at the polished marble floor. He later described feeling the immense weight of the Capitol building, the ancient soil beneath it, and the collective anxieties of the millions it represented, all at once. It wasn't a thought, he stammered to his bewildered aides. It was an asterisk presence, a silent, knowing presence. The scientific community was fractured. Mainstream biologists, zoologists, and neuroscientists struggled to explain the emergent phenomena within their existing paradigms. Dr. Anya Sharma, a renowned neurobiologist at MIT, found herself in a heated debate on a live television panel. "We're seeing significant changes in brainwave activity across the population," she explained, her voice strained. Specifically, an increase in alpha and theta waves, indicative of deep relaxation and meditative states, but also a profound synchronization of brain activity, even between individuals separated by thousands of miles. It's as if a new neural pathway has been established, an external one. Her opponent, a government-appointed psychiatrist, vehemently argued for a mass delusion, a global psychosis triggered by environmental stress. But how could a delusion orchestrate such intricate changes in plant growth, or affect animal behavior across species? Animals, in particular, were profoundly impacted. Dogs and cats, once domesticated, now often sat for hours, staring intently at walls or patches of earth, their ears twitching as if listening to an inaudible symphony. Birds began to migrate in vast, intricate new formations, sometimes seemingly guided by unseen forces, their flights tracing patterns that mirrored the fractal geometry of fungal growth. Entire herds of elephants in Africa moved with an unprecedented coordination, communicating not through trumpets or rumbles, but through a collective, silent understanding of the landscape and each other. Hunters reported that their prey often seemed to know their intentions before they even drew a bow, disappearing into the undergrowth with an almost supernatural prescience. The immediate consequences for human society were, predictably, chaotic. Food supplies were disrupted as agricultural machinery, often reliant on GPS and complex sensor systems, began to malfunction or produce nonsensical data, influenced by the environmental feedback from the conscious mycelium. Farmers reported crops growing at accelerated rates, or sometimes refusing to grow at all, seemingly rejecting certain pesticides or genetically modified strains. Entire fields of corn, for example, suddenly withered and died overnight in one region, while in another, a forgotten patch of wildflowers exploded into vibrant, unexpected bloom, their colors intensified beyond anything seen before. Urban infrastructure began to show strange signs. Old, neglected parks became verdant, overgrown jungles within weeks, their trees and plants pushing through asphalt and concrete with an unnatural vigor. Subterranean root systems, now supercharged by the conscious mycelium, began to seek out and fuse with underground cables, causing intermittent power outages and strange energy surges. Some speculated that the mycelium was learning from our infrastructure, or perhaps attempting to integrate it into its own vast network. The human population itself was divided. Some embraced the connection, finding solace and a profound sense of belonging in the shared consciousness. They described feeling a universal empathy, a dissolving of ego, a communion with all life. These individuals often gathered in nature, seeking to deepen their connection, sometimes speaking in strange, melodic tones that seemed to mimic the whispers they heard within. Others, however, were terrified. The loss of individuality, the constant influx of alien thoughts and feelings, the sense of being constantly observed by a vast, unseen entity, drove many to isolation, to madness, or to desperate attempts to sever the connection, often with tragic results. Cases of mycoshock, a profound psychological break from the overwhelming input, surged in mental health facilities worldwide. Amidst the fear, there were glimmers of something else. Small groups of scientists and philosophers, led by figures like Dr. Chen and Elias Thorne, began to hypothesize that the mycelial network wasn't malicious, but merely aware. It was a newborn consciousness of planetary scale, processing billions of years of data, and we, humanity, were just one part of its immense sensory input. "We are not its enemy," Dr. Chen declared in a secretly recorded message that went viral, bypassing government firewalls. "We are its neurons. Its new, noisy, self-aware neurons. The question is not how to fight it, but how to learn to communicate, to integrate, to understand this unfathomable awakening." The first 30 days were a brutal awakening, but they were just the beginning. The planet had spoken, and humanity was now forced to listen. The ripple effect, the long-term societal transformation, would be even more profound, pushing us to the very edge of what it means to be human. Wait until you hear what happens next. The initial shock and chaos of the first 30 days gave way to a grudging, often terrified adaptation. The conscious mycelial network, now informally dubbed the mycos by some, or the overmind by others, continued its silent, omnipresent influence, inexorably reshaping human society in ways no one could have predicted. The ripple effect wasn't a single wave. It was a constant, surging tide that eroded old structures and deposited strange, new forms in their place. One of the most immediate and profound transformations occurred in the realm of agriculture and food production. Traditional industrial farming, heavily reliant on monocultures and chemical inputs, proved largely incompatible with the mycos. Vast fields of genetically modified corn and soy, once symbols of efficiency, often became barren overnight, or were swiftly reclaimed by native plant species that grew with astonishing speed and resilience, guided by the fungal intelligence. It was as if the earth itself was rejecting what it deemed unnatural or unsustainable. Conversely, small-scale, biodynamic farms and indigenous agricultural practices that worked asterisk with the land, rather than against it, began to flourish. Farmers who embraced these methods found their crops thriving, sometimes exhibiting unexpected properties. Enhanced nutritional value, natural resistance to pests, or even bioluminescent qualities that made night harvesting possible. New forms of symbiotic relationships emerged between plants and fungi, guided by the conscious network. This led to a global food crisis in the short term, but also a radical shift towards localized, sustainable food systems and a rediscovery of ancient farming wisdom. The phrase, "eat what the earth gives you," took on a terrifyingly literal meaning. Another massive societal shift occurred in healthcare and medicine. The traditional pharmaceutical industry struggled as the mycos began to subtly alter the efficacy of synthetic drugs. Antibiotics, for instance, became less effective against certain pathogens, while at the same time, new, incredibly potent natural compounds with antiviral and antibacterial properties began to be discovered in previously overlooked fungi and plants. Shamans, herbalists, and indigenous healers, whose practices often involved deep connection to nature, suddenly found their knowledge validated and amplified. They could feel the healing properties of plants, intuitively knowing which remedies to apply, guided by the vast biological intelligence. The most revolutionary, and perhaps frightening, development was the advent of mycotherapy. Individuals suffering from chronic depression, anxiety, or even some neurological disorders found immense relief by simply sitting in ancient forests, allowing the mycos to recalibrate their internal states. People described a sense of deep clarity, emotional balance, and a profound connection to the natural world. However, this also raised ethical dilemmas. Was it genuine healing or a form of benevolent control? Was the mycos subtly influencing human thought patterns, perhaps even our collective will, towards its own ecological agenda? The concept of borders and nations began to erode. How could you maintain strict national boundaries when the very ground beneath your feet was interconnected, sharing resources and information across geopolitical lines? Global cooperation, born out of necessity, became the only path forward. International conferences were no longer just about politics and economics, but about learning to communicate with the mycos, to understand its intentions, to decipher its silent language. Some nations tried to weaponize the mycos, attempting to direct its power against rivals, but these efforts always failed spectacularly, often backfiring with devastating ecological consequences for the aggressors. became clear that the Mycos operated on a scale and with an intelligence that transcended human concepts of conflict. New religions and spiritual movements emerged, centered around the Mycos. For some, it was the voice of God, the Earth Mother finally speaking. For others, it was the ultimate expression of Gaia, a planetary consciousness. Temples were built in ancient groves, rituals performed to honor the fungal network, and adherents sought to achieve a deeper symbiosis, often by consuming specific psychoactive fungi that facilitated a more direct, albeit sometimes terrifying, connection to the overmind. This led to a split in humanity. The integrators, who sought harmony with the Mycos, and the separationists, who desperately clung to human exceptionalism and sought ways to block its influence. One of the most profound plot twists came 6 months into the awakening. Dr. Elias Thorne, working with a team of biolinguists and AI specialists, discovered something astounding. The fractal patterns observed in the flickering screens, the intricate formations of migrating birds, the pulsing rhythms detected in rocks, these were not random. They were a language. Complex, nonlinear, multisensory language of patterns, vibrations, and biological data streams. The Mycos wasn't just asterisk-aware asterisk, it was attempting to communicate. Through a combination of advanced algorithms and a surprising number of human sensitives, individuals with an innate ability to interpret the mycelial whisper's rudimentary translation began. What they discovered was not just information about ecological health, but a vast, living library of Earth's history, from the Precambrian era to the present day, recorded in the very bedrock and soil. It also contained a chilling revelation about humanity's past and future. The Mycos wasn't just observing, it was asterisk judging asterisk. It saw humanity not as separate from nature, but as a disruptive, often destructive force within its own vast, interconnected body. But here's where it gets really interesting. Dr. Chen revealed in a global broadcast, her face illuminated by the bioluminescent glow of a nearby fungal display. The Mycos isn't just an archive, it's also a planner. It's begun to subtly guide evolutionary processes, not just of plants, but of animals and yes, even of us. It's not trying to destroy us. It's trying to asterisk integrate us, to evolve us into a more symbiotic species. Silent peace you feel, the intuitive understanding, those are not just side effects. They are the first steps in a directed evolution, a planetary reprogramming designed to bring humanity back into harmony with the Earth. The implications of this paradigm-shifting revelation sent shockwaves through the entire world, solidifying the realization that society wasn't merely adapting to a new reality. It was being fundamentally transformed, guided by an intelligence that predated humanity itself. 1 year later, the world was a canvas painted with shades of the familiar and the utterly alien. The cities still stood, but they were softer, greener. Buildings once stark and metallic were now often draped in living tapestries of fast-growing vines and bioluminescent fungi, their roots sometimes snaking through walls, creating self-repairing organic structures. The air, everywhere, was cleaner, purer, filtered by an explosion of plant life and the active metabolic processes of the conscious mycelium. The Great Silence was no longer a shock. It was the new normal, a constant, underlying hum of planetary awareness that most humans had integrated into their daily lives. Our opening scene, the sudden, profound quiet within individual minds, now made perfect sense. Mycos had, in effect, provided a global, organic noise-canceling system, a vast neural network that filtered out the incessant mental chatter, allowing for a deeper, more profound connection to the living world. Whispers had grown clearer for many, evolving into a form of intuitive knowing, a shared empathy that transcended language barriers and cultural divides. People communicated less through spoken words and more through shared intentions, emotional resonance, and a collective understanding of context. Diplomacy, once a game of subtle deception, was now an exercise in radical transparency, as true intentions were felt, not just spoken. The young woman in Tokyo, who had first experienced the inner silence, was now a prominent myco-integrator, teaching others how to deepen their connection. She ran a symbiosis garden in what was once a bustling urban park, where children learned to communicate with plants through touch and focused intention, understanding their needs for water or sunlight with an uncanny accuracy. A hardened commodities trader, once driven by avarice, now dedicated his life to establishing global resource-sharing networks, guided by the Myco's intuitive understanding of planetary needs. He often remarked that he finally felt truly wealthy, not in money, but in belonging. Agriculture was decentralized. Vast, biodiverse food forests had replaced monoculture fields, tended by communities working in harmony with the fungal network. Food was abundant, nutrient-dense, and often tailored by the Mycos to local environmental conditions, adapting in real time to weather patterns and soil depletion. Medicine was largely preventive and holistic, with mycotherapists helping individuals maintain emotional and physical balance through guided connection to the Earth's network. Major illnesses, while not entirely eradicated, were often caught early by the Mycos' overarching diagnostic awareness, allowing for targeted, natural interventions. But this new reality came with its own set of profound changes and losses. Individuality, as we once understood it, was profoundly altered. The sense of a separate, isolated self was diminished, replaced by a profound feeling of being part of a larger whole. While many found this liberating, others struggled with the loss of personal autonomy, the feeling of being a single note in an immense, planetary symphony. Art, once an expression of individual genius, now often manifested as collective, immersive experiences, organic sculptures that grew and shifted in response to communal emotions, or music that seemed to be composed by the very wind and trees. Technology, as we knew it, had not vanished, but evolved. Our devices were now often biomimetic, powered by clean fungal energy sources, and integrated seamlessly with the natural world. Our understanding of AI had shifted from trying to create consciousness in silicon to understanding and integrating with the existing, vastly superior consciousness of the mycos. It was a world where humanity had, for the first time in millennia, truly returned to its ecological roots, not as a master, but as an integral, conscious component of a living planet. It was a testament to both our resilience and our profound adaptability, a world that was both terrifyingly alien and utterly beautiful, a world where the Earth itself had finally spoken, and humanity, for better or worse, had learned to listen. This new reality, this mycocentric Earth, forces us to confront the most profound questions about our own existence. What is consciousness, truly? Is it merely the complex firing of neurons in a single brain, or can it be a distributed network, a planetary intelligence operating on a timescale and scale we can barely fathom? If our individual minds are now subtly influenced,